Good morning. All of us wanting to abide in happiness, free of suffering and problems, we need to embark on this journey of transforming our mind, radically transforming our way of thinking, because this is the method by which one will come to gain lasting, stable happiness. So how to do so? And firstly, one needs to recognize with clarity that our suffering all comes from karma that we've accumulated under the influence of the afflictions. And amongst the afflictions, the very root cause of the stream of suffering is our ignorance of self-grasping. Recognizing that, then we need to strive to develop the antidote, the opposing consciousness, so that we can eradicate the root cause of our suffering. And the antidote to cultivate is the wisdom realizing emptiness. And over the last couple of days, we've spoken about the preliminaries to that meditation and the meditation itself on how to cultivate the wisdom realizing emptiness. Yesterday we concluded looking at the first part of the main practice, so the second of the 7 points of the Mahayana mind training, which is how to cultivate ultimate bodhicitta, the wisdom realizing emptiness. Now we come to the second part of the main practice, which is how to develop conventional bodhicitta. So we'll start by looking at the way to train one's mind so as to give rise, so as to generate conventional bodhicitta. So the 6th line, training the two, taking and giving alternatively. So in brief, this refers to the method of equalizing and exchanging self with others so as to give rise to compassion and bodhicitta. So on our first day together, we spoke about great compassion being the cause for bodhicitta, and that great compassion itself is imperative at the beginning of one's training, so prior to becoming a bodhisattva. It's imperative at the middle of one's training, whilst one is a bodhisattva, and at the end of one's training, when one has completed one's training and is a Buddha. So great compassion is of the utmost importance. So how then to generate it? So this is where we're going to start. So great compassion is the wish for all sentient beings to abandon suffering and the causes of suffering. In other words, their afflictions together with their seeds. So great compassion holds all sentient beings close and wants them to gain freedom from their afflictions and the seeds of their afflictions. That's the meaning of compassion. And this needs to be cultivated to the point where it's uncontrived or spontaneous. It doesn't need to be generated. It is just naturally part of one. So then we start with looking at how to develop great compassion. So this text is very concise. And its ideal target audience is those who are already well learned and trained. So for them, they would come to this point and immediately engage in the practice of taking and giving. But that assumes they have already cultivated great compassion. And they are using, then on the basis of taking and giving, they're using on the basis of great compassion, the training of taking and giving to generate bodhicitta. So for us, who have not yet developed great compassion, it is of far more benefit here at this point to learn how to generate great compassion so that we can apply that aspect of the training, cultivating great compassion. So this is where we're going to start, with how to cultivate great compassion. So the starting point is to recognize, be honest with ourselves about the level of compassion that we have. In truth, we have a sense of compassion for all beings. We want all beings to be free of suffering. But that level of compassion is not equal. It is very dependent on who those beings are to us, how they relate to us. Those that we are quite disconnected for, the feeling of compassion we have for them is quite weak. Those that we dislike, our feeling of compassion, especially when this disliking mind arises, is so weak you could say it's not manifest. Those within our circle those in our group, those that we identify with, there we have more of a wish of compassion, more of a wish that may they be free of suffering and its causes. But our wish for freedom from suffering and its causes is strongest for ourselves. So this is where we are, and that's fine, it's where we are, but this needs to be recognized, because then we know where our actual starting point is, and that is where we then need to start training. So we need to recognize that we relate to others differently from ourselves. So why do we not have this mind of great compassion towards all beings equally? It's just because we haven't cultivated it. This is why we don't have it. We haven't cultivated it. We haven't generated it. And why have we not done so? Because we haven't studied and trained. We do not know how to do so, and we have not done so. So whilst lacking knowledge and training, we cannot be expected to have this quality. That is all. And just to say, this word for study and is also the word for training. It has both meanings. Learning knowledge and integrating that, training your mind in what you are learning. So because that hasn't been done, how can we expect ourselves to have this attitude? Conversely, or from this we recognize by doing so, we will have such an attitude. The first step of our training, well, to come to recognize the first step. If you think of your possessions in your home, there are some that you really hold as dear to you. They have very little resale value. Others will look at them and see, why are you insisting that everywhere you move to, you have this particular possession with you? And it's because for you, it has sentimental value. You value it greatly. And if you were in an emergency and you had to flee your home, you'd make sure you take this with you. So in this way, we see in our regular life, there are some possessions that we value greatly beyond what other people would ascribe to that possession. So this shows this mind of differentiation. Likewise, in terms of people, we differentiate in a similar way. So what we need to challenge this differentiation between people is to come to recall the kindness they have shown us. Because it's through seeing the good that others bring to us, bring into our life, seeing the actual relationship that we have with others, we will value them, we will hold them as dear. So just like in our home, many things, possessions we take for granted, and if we broke them or lost them, it wouldn't really matter to us. But some we hold as really dear, as sentimental. So likewise, this is the kind of attitude to cultivate towards all beings, to recognize their value and how how we benefit from their relationship with them. And in this way, we come to recognize their kindness, or you can translate this as the benefits they bring into our lives. And in this way, we will start to change the way we naturally relate to all others. So develop an attitude of closeness towards all, an attitude where each individual being is held as equally dear. This is very difficult to do. So one needs to train in a specific way so as to break through the barriers of how we misconceive our relationship with others. So in this training of recalling the kindness of others, we start with those whose kindness in this life is the most apparent. So we would start usually, in most instances, it would be with one's parents, and again, within that, it would usually be with one's mother. And there one through recalling the kindness one's mother has shown, we start with the extensive period where we have no recollection. So we imagine how she would have related to us before we had developed the mental capacity to have recollection. From the moment that she was aware of our presence within her body, she immediately changed her behavior. She made sure she moved with care. She made sure that what she ate and drank would not harm us. So from the moment that she became aware of our existence, she related to us with kindness. And through this period of her pregnancy, we didn't bring directly too much joy to her. We brought quite some discomfort. And then at the time of birth, real danger, especially in years gone by, in decades gone by, in centuries gone by, brought real danger and immense pain. And then, but beyond that, for that first period of our life, when we were completely helpless, that if we were left on our own, we could not have survived. We were completely reliant on the kindness of our parents, in particular, usually our mother, for our food, for our protection from the elements, and in this way, she gave to us. What we gave to her in return, directly, very little from our side. We would laugh and we would smile, and this would bring her joy. Beyond that, she was cleaning our bodily fluids, she was feeding us, she was keeping us warm. Giving so much, and directly from our side, giving very little. But in this way, we see how she placed our needs before her own. And even though she would have been, throughout this period, experiencing tremendous hardships, and sometimes some difficulty with it, still she did what was needed for us to stay alive and to grow. I hope for many of you, you can relate to this easily, and warmth can arise within you. For some, though, what you recall of your parents is not pleasant at all, and one has very negative memories of one's childhood. Whilst this is the case in some instances, for our purpose here, we need to be skillful. Why are we reflecting on the kindness of others? It's so that we can become bodhisattvas for the sake of others. So in this part of our training, if we focus on the faults of our parents, what will happen is our mind will become negative, and we'll feel more distant from them, or the distance we already feel with them will grow stronger. The negativity we feel towards them will grow stronger. So the reality that everyone can acknowledge is that ordinary beings have wonderful qualities, and that same being also has bad qualities. And there's a varying balance between some. Some have stronger good qualities, some have weaker good qualities. So it's not about dismissing or denying the harm that may have been done to you. But for the purpose here, the purpose of becoming a bodhisattva, we focus on the kindness, the good that our parents have done. Later, when we are skilled practitioners, then when we recall the harm they've done, compassion will arise. We'll recognize they are suffering beings. Hence, they did the best they could, but they afflicted and therefore were suffering and made mistakes. But for now, when the harm that one's parents have done arises, rather put it aside and focus on the kindness they've done. And there's plenty there that one can at least intellectually imagine. One may not recall, but intellectually imagine. And this is where we need to place our mind in order to achieve our goal of becoming a bodhisattva. If you think about it clearly, we can have illustrations that make this difference quite clear in our own lives. Imagine a child misbehaving in some way, maybe making a lot of noise, throwing things around, whatever it may be. And there are two people there, two adults there. One is the loving parent of that child, and the other is someone who doesn't know the child. So the loving parent will, their love for their child will not be impeded, will not be harmed by the child's misbehaving, because what's dominant in their mind is a sense of tenderness towards their child. They will readily accept that this is a little child, maybe a toddler, and is having a tantrum. This is what they do. It's to be expected. It's not the end of the world. The other person, maybe someone who doesn't like children or is just in a bad mood, they're observing the exact same behavior, but have a very different response. And why? Not their child. Maybe they don't like kids. Maybe they're just in a bad mood, but they just wish this child would shut up. Maybe wish it just wasn't there in their presence now at all. So we see two very different responses to the same behavior. And why? These two adults have different ways of thinking. This is all. This is all. It says actually nothing about the two adults. It just means they have a different way of thinking that perhaps is dominant in them, but certainly a different way of thinking that is manifest within them at that moment. That is the only difference. It's nothing fundamental to them as individuals. It's just a different way of thinking. So the meditation, one starts with recollecting the kindness of one's parents, usually starts with one's mother and then one's father. And then one expands the circle when there's a feeling of tenderness, of closeness, of affection for them arises. One expands that to the next group with which it's easy to recognize the kindness they've shown. And here one thinks of one's close relatives, one's good friends. And here, again, recall the kindness that they have shown, the benefits they have brought into your life. Maybe here it's good to say as an aside, so the Tibetan word here is always kindness, but in English it's better to understand it as both kindness and benefit, because kindness in English implies there's an intention to be of benefit. And that may be lacking, especially in the second group and now in the third group. So think of it as both kindness and benefit. So the second group, back to what Kenla said, the second group then is one's relatives, one's friends, because one can most easily recognize the kindness that they have shown to us, the benefit we have received from them. Then, when a sense of affection for them has arisen too, a sense of warmth has arisen for them too, one then expands to all beings. And this then is more difficult because this is now just a concept, all beings. And the way to relate to this is be aware of our interdependence with them, that we are not isolated beings, but are deeply entwined with beings that in this life we have never met. And here, with a modern way of understanding, we can think of globalization or supply chains, and through this we can recognize how many beings have made effort that led to us being able to eat, led to us being able to wear our clothes, led to us to have whatever possessions we have. None of this we gained by ourselves, but independence on the activities, the kindness of others. In this way, we can use this as a basis to develop a sense of tenderness, of warmth, of closeness towards all beings, including those that we have never met. In this third step, or the third grouping, all sentient beings, one comes to recognize that the fact that I'm still alive is really dependent on others. If I was not interconnected with others, reliant on others, I probably would have not be here anymore. That I have things to eat, to wear, a home to live in, has all come about in dependence on others. And so too, that whatever my level of health is, this is dependent on others. And we think here of all the machinery and modern technology that's involved not just with food production, but then we can think of medicine as well, and various forms of medical treatment. This has all come about in dependence on the activities of others from which we benefit. So in this way, we come to recognize just how we are the beneficiary of the other beings' beneficial actions. Whether they are intending to be of benefit to us or not, we benefit from them. We are interconnected with them, entwined with them. Furthermore, in this generation of a sense of closeness towards all, one recognizes that the very fact that I can do this meditation and accumulate the causes that will lead to excellent rebirths and lead to my progression and eventual attainment of liberation and enlightenment, this too is dependent on others. So most naturally we'll turn here to the kindness of our spiritual teachers and spiritual tradition. But it's important to recognize that the reason that I'm able to hear and understand these teachings and engage in this meditation, whilst the spiritual teacher is at a central role there, this too is dependent on innumerable beings. The fact that one has an education so that one can understand speech, can read text, and can have the lifestyle where one has time to sit and think about things of great importance. This is dependent on so many beings. There may be central figures, primary figures, but there are so many others who are indispensable. Some we'll know, many we don't know. But from a point of being nearby or at a distance, are all contributing in this web from which we come to gain benefit. So our body, our knowledge, our opportunity to cultivate virtuous karma and spiritually develop, all of this is dependent on the kindness of others. So engaging in this reflection breaks down the barrier between ourselves and others, this feeling of strangers or distance, and breaks that down and recognizes how entwined we are. This reflection then also reflects on how, whilst we are, this reflection as mentioned earlier, we're focusing on the good that others bring to us. Certainly we will recall those who are a bit more challenging in our lives. But we recognize that even these people that we are struggling to get on with at the moment, in dependence on them, one has the opportunity to practice patience and to cultivate the great virtue that comes from transforming one's attitude towards others, so as no longer experiencing hardship from them, no longer seeing them as enemies. So to cultivate the virtue of patience is entirely dependent on others. So too, the practice of ethical restraint, that in order to restrain oneself from bringing harm to others, one needs to have others to engage in. So in this way, we see that even those that we find challenging, in dependence on them, we cultivate causes for lasting happiness. And in this way, they show us kindness or bring benefits into our life. And the third illustration that's clear is generosity. So generosity is expressed in many ways, but in particular it comes down to this attitude of giving of oneself to others, being open and receptive to be there for others. So this is entirely dependent on others to give our time to, give our energy to, share our possessions with. So we see in this way how we are dependent on others to accumulate virtue. And in reality, if we were entirely alone, we couldn't survive even a day. Where this is most clear is when we were within our mother's bodies, and when we were an infant, and even a young toddler, completely dependent on the care of others. We could not have survived a day. But even now as adults, if we were completely independent of others, we would not survive the day. Because our food comes about in dependence on others. You cannot even grow your own food without the support of insects and so forth. This entire world is a dependent arising. By reflecting well, we come to recognize this deep, entwined relationship with others. And therefore we are not alone, but we support others and they support us. This is the nature of our interdependent relationships. Thinking in this way, it leads to a warmth towards others, a closeness, holding them affectionately, tenderly. And to the extent that arises, naturally we'll want them to be happy. We'll want the very best for them. And this is the arisal of love. May all beings be happy and have the causes for happiness. And following from that is the companion mind of compassion. And may they be free of suffering and the cause of suffering. One trains and trains until this arises spontaneously, is uncontrived. One doesn't need to sit down and meditate to cultivate love and compassion for others. Then one can be said, when it's uncontrived, to have generated love and compassion. So with the mind of compassion, this wish, may all sentient beings be free from suffering and its causes. Here, this really comes down to wanting beings to abandon the afflictions together with their seeds, so they never suffer again. So this really is what the meaning of compassion in Buddhism is. It's directed at all beings equally to be freed of the afflictions and the causes of the afflictions. The way, though, it would be experienced is think back to what we heard in the preliminary practices. First, to be freed of manifest suffering, and as well as subtle suffering, so true sufferings, as well as the origins of suffering, true origins, namely the afflictions. This is what compassion is focused on. the suffering that beings experience, but in particular, the subtler levels and the origins of their suffering. And having trained well in the preliminaries, this will arise within oneself. One will have that experience of wanting to be freed oneself from this, and now one's applying it to others. Moreover, the mind will be strong because of the prior training also in developing an understanding of emptiness. This will give one a great strength of mind, a determined attitude of, not only do I want to be a person who leads all beings to attain a state freed of suffering, but I can do that. It is not beyond my capacity. Moreover, it's not beyond their capacity to be guided and attain freedom. So this leads to a strength of mind, a confidence, which, as mentioned yesterday, is a defining feature of compassion in Buddhism. That it is not merely empathy, but it is a deeply courageous mind, born from a conviction of knowing that this is entirely possible. With that arisen in the mind, finally then, the sixth point, one can train in the two, taking and giving alternatively. So this is the point when one now trains in taking and giving, or practices taking and giving. So then in the meditation on taking and giving, what taking refers to is one imagines all the suffering that beings are experiencing, in both physical and mental, as well as the causes of suffering. So there would be their afflictions and their seeds. So one imagines taking those from them. So to link it back to what we've looked at earlier, true sufferings and true origins. This is what one is taking from them. Their physical suffering, their mental suffering, and the causes of suffering. Their afflictions and the seeds of the afflictions. So imagine taking these on, and then in return, what we give is all our virtue. The virtue that we have accumulated in this meditation thus far, as well as the virtue we're accumulating by wholeheartedly wanting them to be free of suffering so that we're taking it on, all the virtue that we've accumulated in lifetimes up to this point so that we are able to engage in this meditation, all this virtue we imagine giving to them. And we imagine that virtue then abiding within them. Their mind is now free of afflictions. Their mind is dominated by virtuous thoughts and the seeds of virtuous thoughts. And we imagine that ripening within them, that their body is a body free of any pain or difficulty. They're developing qualities of the path within, whether calm abiding, definite emergence, love, compassion, bodhicitta, realizing emptiness and becoming Buddhas. So all of this we imagine with giving. So this then is the meaning of taking and giving. We do so in the sequence of meditations. If we start with preparing our meditation room, so the 6 preparatory practices, we do the 2 parts of the preliminary meditations, precious human rebirth, impermanence, true sufferings, true origins, and then we cultivate the wisdom and understanding emptiness, and then we cultivate compassion. So these are all the prior meditations we do, and now we're engaging in taking and giving in the way it's just described. And by engaging in this taking and giving, the purpose for ourselves is to strengthen our determination to be of benefit to others, to ease their suffering burden. And through this process of imagining others suffering ever less because of our engagement and experiencing ever greater happiness because of our engagement, this strengthens our courage, our strength of mind, that we can have a beneficial impact on others. When engaging in this meditation on taking the suffering on from others and giving virtue to them, one abides in meditation with as little distraction as possible. So the actual yogis would be in meditative equipoise with the mind completely undistracted. And for us, we try and do so for a few minutes. Actual yogins would do so for a lot longer. And we in this way, engage in taking and giving with the entire preceding meditation. All that being said, another point needs to be made here. To bring it back down to reality, to take it away from the level of aspiration and bring it back down to reality, which is where we are now, is as beings with strong self-cherishing, where the fulfillment of our own needs is really still first and foremost. Hence, we need to embark on this process of training. So when the thought of genuinely taking on the suffering of others arises, there will, in all honesty, be a hesitation. And we can see this in lived experience. If you think back to where it would be 6 years ago, when the pandemic was starting in the world, and the causes, the outcome, and so forth was not known. Treatment was what hadn't yet been developed. There was tremendous fear, and people were encouraged and did isolate themselves from others. And they didn't want to be near anyone who was sick because they knew that something bad would happen. We didn't yet know what, but they protected themselves first and foremost. And whilst those days are for now behind us, even with regular illness like influenza, if someone's contagious, we still protect ourselves. This is where we are as ordinary people. Our own happiness and the achievement of our own happiness is still first and foremost. So understanding that, where we are, then it is more skillful to engage in this meditation on taking and giving with one's own situation, where one imagines transforming the suffering that oneself is experiencing, as well as imagine suffering that will still befall you, physical or mental suffering, and imagine transforming it through this meditation and oneself becoming free of suffering and its causes and spiritually developing. So the meditation is done in the same way as presented before, but in relation to oneself, taking and eradicating one's own suffering and the causes of suffering, and giving oneself the causes of happiness and attaining the results of those causes of happiness. So this is where one should start right now, to develop skill in the meditation so that one can then actually be able to do it in relation to others with a genuinely courageous mind. So to return then to the way the meditation is intended for the greater practitioners, where one is taking on the suffering of others and giving one's virtue to them, then the question will arise, in reality, what is going on here? Am I really going to experience their suffering? Is it going to actually ripen on my continuum? And thereby I can say, I actually have taken the suffering of others. And by giving my virtue to them, will it really ripen on their continuum? And thereby they attain freedom from happiness? In reality, this isn't going to happen. Then that leads to the second question. Then why am I doing this? Is this not just a waste of time? I'm just playing some game in my mind? Well, what is the point of this then? You go through this whole meditation, just making something up? What is the point of this? So really, in reality, this process cannot be done in a literal sense. Because if it could, we'd all be enlightened long ago, because the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas would have long since done it for us. So in reality, one cannot take the suffering of others and give happiness to them. So whilst in reality, we are not freeing even a single being from their suffering entirely and placing even a single being in the state of a Buddha. Nevertheless, though, this is a greatly important training because of the impact it has on our mind. Training in this way, going through this process of meditation, leads to the mind of the meditator becoming vast and expansive, and in particular courageous. This meditation has this particular quality of developing the strength of mind of the practitioner that then has an impact on how the practitioner engages with others. So in this way, it has a real-world application in the sense, through doing the meditation, that meditation itself doesn't lead to all beings becoming Buddhas. But through the impact it has on the practitioner's mind, the practitioner thereafter has a direct impact on others. in that it impacts how the practitioner directly engages with others. Well trained in taking on the suffering and giving benefit to others will then be expressed in one's interactions with others. And in this way, one directly brings benefit to others. And furthermore, this aspect of courage or strength of mind is imperative for the bodhisattva, because the commitment that the bodhisattva makes is to each and every being, without exception. And so here, if we think of the Lama Chöpa puja in the 104th verse, when in the Lamrim prayer, talking about enthusiastic perseverance. So I'll read the verse. Please bless me to complete the perfection of joyous perseverance by striving with compassion for supreme enlightenment, not getting discouraged even if I must remain for an ocean of aeons in the fiery hells of Avici for every sentient being. So that expression of that attitude expressed there shows a deeply courageous mind, a mind that does not get disturbed by needing to encounter beings who are suffering and having hardship, whoever they are. With joy, in whatever circumstance they're in, with joy, I will be there with them, and my mind will not be disturbed, not be upset, but I will give ever more. So this kind of attitude it comes about through engaging in taking and giving. And to quote a famous verse from Sutra of the Buddha, where the first three lines stand in stark contradiction to the practice of taking and giving, the first three lines, but the fourth line explains the actual purpose in reality of the practice of taking and giving. So the verse goes something like, I cannot wash away the non-virtue of beings with water. I cannot remove their suffering with my hands. I cannot bestow my qualities upon them. So those first three lines clearly show that taking and giving, you could say, doesn't work. Because I cannot wash away their non-virtue with water. I cannot remove their suffering with my hands, and I cannot bestow my good qualities on them. So here, then you ask, what's the point of taking and giving? The fourth line then, the only way I can help is by teaching, and they striving to liberate themselves. So this then is how taking and giving actually works. So retranslate that fourth line in a more expansive way to match the meaning here. The way that I can help is by teaching and guiding beings so that through my influence they train in the Four Noble Truths and the paths of the Bodhisattva and thereby attain enlightenment. So this is how the Buddhas help beings. And this is how, through the engaging in taking and giving, that one develops the qualities within, that one can be a skillful guide, and guide beings through one's example, through one's influence, not being disturbed by suffering, of willingly giving of oneself, and thereby lead all beings to enlightenment. So, through training in the methods presented in this text, we will become Buddhas. So in this way, we can see how the Buddhas, through their training, are benefiting us. We are, in a sense, a result of their expression of taking and giving. So the Buddhas, their focus in terms of benefiting, whilst with their bodhicitta, their focus is on each and every being equally, they primarily focus on those who can cultivate the paths within their continuum. Because this fourth line of that verse, the only way I can help is by teaching, and you striving to train yourself. This is something that those with a precious human rebirth can do. The way Buddhas and Bodhisattvas can help beings in other realms, such as animals, is by showing them kindness, giving them food, not doing harm. And this is what we can do for them too. But for human beings, in particular those with a precious human rebirth, one can cultivate the qualities of the path. Because it's only those with a precious human rebirth who can actually understand that our suffering comes from non-virtuous karma, which was accumulated by the afflictions, which have at their root the ignorance of self-grasping, and can be abandoned through the cultivation of the wisdom-realizing emptiness, which itself needs to be developed independent on its preliminary practices, reflecting on precious human rebirth, impermanence, and the Four Noble Truths. So in this way, we see how we are the beneficiaries of the kindness of all others, in particular through the practice of taking and giving of the great beings. And we also recognize the importance of a precious human rebirth, of making the very most of what we have, this opportunity, and ensuring we continue life after life to achieve such rebirths. In conclusion, to reiterate the importance of abandoning the afflictions. So you've heard this come up a number of times and being a particular focus at some points, but it's imperative that this is the focus of our mental engagement, what we are doing with our mind, making sure it's not under the influence of the afflictions, but rather the mind is virtuous. Because this is how one abandons the afflictions, by transforming our way of thinking, making leading our mind to be ever less afflicted, ever more virtuous. And what is the method for doing so? Well, it's to hear teachings and reflect and meditate on them. This is the meaning. And that first step of hearing or studying is imperative, because without knowledge, what is one going to later meditate on? Just to say as an aside, in this sequence of hearing, reflecting, and meditating, here meditation means single-pointed meditation. Reflection means what we normally call meditation, thinking about the meaning. Okay, that's an aside. So to be able to eventually engage in single-pointed meditation on anything, one has to know what one is meditating on. For this, one needs to have heard or studied and reflected on it, understood it deeply. So because of this, His Holiness has said many times when giving advice to monastic communities that do not put your emphasis on the superficial, in having impressive buildings and so forth. It's having superficially impressive facilities, but without impressive mental transformation inside, is completely missing the point. Impressive mental transformation, this is what matters. Having impressive environments is really unimportant. So, for those of you with capacity for studying and reflecting and meditating, that is where your energy needs to go, rather than in the superficial. So His Holiness has emphasized this many times, and I want to repeat it here, the importance of hearing and reflecting, putting one's energy there. And then we'll conclude there for this morning and continue this afternoon. Thank you.